But let's go ahead and get to going on our program this evening, maintaining insurability. This program comes in two parts. The first part of the program describes the insurance issue as it exists today. And then the second half provides a strategy that hopefully will make you more attractive and more insurable when you want to renew or start a new policy on a beach airplane. Some of the challenges that the insurance industry faces now, and we face in the insurance industry, are related to a number of different factors. One, of course, is pilot age. Our entire general aviation pilot population is reaching a point in their lives that a large percentage of us are older than a large percentage had been in the past. And that's become a bit of an issue. We'll look at some AOPA and other research that might be guiding some of the insurance industry's thinking about pilot age and insurability. Aircraft age is also an issue. Now, a perfectly maintained 1959 Bonanza can be a beautiful airplane and extraordinarily safe and effective and capable, but if something goes wrong with that airplane, it becomes very expensive to repair. And so the age of an airplane becomes an issue to insurance companies, and that's reflected in their underwriting practices. The complexity of an aircraft obviously is an issue. Retractable gear airplanes historically cost insurance companies more than fixed gears. Multi-engine airplanes historically cost them more than single-engine airplanes, and then pressurized airplanes are a completely different risk beyond that level. So the complexity of the airplane is part of what the underwriters are looking at. Unique aircraft features, for example, the ruddervators on VTOL Bonanzas. It may be that a very minor issue becomes extremely expensive, or in some cases even impossible for the insurance company to fix. So sometimes they won't insure a certain class of airplane because of that. Other times they more recently are starting to add clauses where they limit the amount of dollar coverage they will apply to something like a ruddervator. So these are some of the issues that they're facing as well. Overall, they're most concerned about claims. Claims is the money that the insurance companies pay out. Insurance companies are not-for-profit organizations. They're responsible to their shareholders, and they've got to make a profit. And so as claims become an issue, whether it be the aircraft itself or storm-related claims that affect airplanes, the insurance underwriters that underwrite us are themselves insured in something called the reinsurance market. And the reinsurance market is what protects an insurance underwriting firm from going completely bankrupt in the event of a catastrophic set of claims among its customers. The reinsurance market does not limit itself to just general aviation airplanes. It's also involved in airlines and other commercial operations, and in many cases, peripheral things like airports and FBOs, and even non-aviation issues, so that when there's a major hurricane or a tornado hits a series of airports, which unfortunately we've seen in the last couple of years, the reinsurance gets more expensive for the insurance underwriters. And so as the underwriters' rates go up, they pass those rates up to us. AOPA published recently some data that shows the average claim value being paid out by the insurance company. This in the last several years, you can see that the amount of money being paid out by the insurance industry has gone up. Also on the right here, this is the average value of a liability claim that resulted in a fatality. And in the most recent year there, you can see that the average payout for a fatality exceeded $5 million per individual. Now, a lot of this is in the airline world where they have higher limits, but you can see where somebody gets seriously injured or killed in an airplane. Not only is it absolutely tragic, but it's also very expensive for the insurance company as well. Overall, the insurance companies show losses over the last several years. The huge loss in 2019 was related to some hurricane-related damage, and also the 737 MAX issue is cited as being a big problem in that year. And in the most recent year for which we have number, even though the Amount of flying significantly decreased in 2020. The insurance industry overall still reported losing over $52 million in the year. They've got to somehow make that up to be able to turn a profit, to be responsible to their shareholders, and that's resulted in some liability claims. But let's look a little more closely at our little corner of the aviation world. Personally owned piston airplanes, singles and twins, retractable gear in the beach, in the world here, in the ABS world here. About a year or so ago, AOPA's Air Safety Institute published a short and very interesting video. It's still available on AOPA's website. And the video is, what are the costliest insurance claims? What sort of things actually cost the insurance company the most money? In other words, what are they most worried about? What are they most trying to control? Now, as it turns out, the most costly individual claims are the sort of things that we would think they would be. Liability claims where there is serious injury or death. And in many cases, a serious injury where someone survives the mishap can be even costlier than a fatality to an insurance company. But in any event, anytime there's injury or death involved, it gets very expensive for an individual claim. The items that are most commonly seen in the insurance industry are controlled flight into terrain types, crashes on an instrument approach, which may or may not be a CFIT, loss of control in flight, which we've heard about a lot, is the biggest single cause of fatalities in general aviation airplanes. In-flight breakups, which are a result of loss of control in flight, and other weather-related crashes. So if one of these things happens, this is going to be a very expensive claim for the insurance company. I don't want to downplay at all the tragedy, the human issues involved here, but we're talking about why the insurance industry is thinking the way it does right now, and it's because it sees these sorts of things. But interestingly, although as individual claims, these cost the most per claim, the real expense paid out by insurance companies comes from non-injury claims. And in AOPA's presentation, they talk about the 4 most costly categories of accident. The first most costly, most common thing that the insurance companies have to pay out on are propeller strikes, taxiway mishaps, and very frequently, somebody leaving the tow bar on the airplane and starting up. Why are these so costly, even though nobody gets hurt usually? Because a prop strike or a sudden propeller stoppage requires an engine tear down. You've got many thousands of dollars involved in repairing the propeller typically, and a whole lot of money involved in engine tear down and inspection and reassembly. So this is, as a category, the 4th most costly thing that the insurance company deals with, the insurance industry deals with. The 3rd most costly category are hard landings. We just don't maintain the right airspeed. We stall the airplane higher than we're supposed to in a false stall landing, and it causes damage to the aircraft. It might not hurt anybody, but it can cause significant airplane damage. The 2nd most costly, sometimes it's the result of a hard land, be it all hard landing, but also other categories or other types of scenarios, loss of directional control on the runway, either during takeoff or more commonly during landing. Ground loops are not exclusive to tailwheel airplanes. We do a lot of loss of directional control mishaps in tricycle gear airplanes as well. And as a class, this is the 2nd most costly set of claims the insurance industry deals with. The most costly scenario, really, we're used to talking about it a lot in the Bonanza Baron world, but by a large margin, the most costly scenario type is a gear up or a gear collapse mishap. This involves a propeller repair. It also involves an engine teardown and inspection. In many, many cases, a gear up or gear collapse mishap causes enough damage that the airplane is totaled. So the insurance company just writes a check for the insured amount of the aircraft and has to report that to its shareholders. The reason I think this is very surprising is because although retractable gear airplanes make up somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of the entire piston general aviation fleet, gear up and gear collapse mishaps are by a large margin the most expensive thing the insurance company deals with, insurance industry deals with the entire general aviation fleet. So our little corner, the retractable gear corner of the universe of GA airplanes, is costing the entire universe of GA airplanes in terms of insurance claims. No wonder the insurance companies look very, very closely at retractable gear airplanes like our Bonanzas and Barons and Debonairs and Travelers. Now, you may see, you may have seen, when I'm supposed to be sleeping at night, I do a blog and a few other things. Mastery flight training, I've actually done that for longer than I've been at ABS. And one of the things that I do, I've recorded since 1998, is what I call the Beechcraft Weekly Accident Update. And I review trends, I track trends in piston Beechcraft accidents with the hope that by knowing how these accidents unfold, we can avoid them in the future. And at the end of last year's 2021's report, I ended up with these sorts of statistics. There were 135 reported mishaps among these types of airplanes, the Bonanza, Baron, Debonair, Traveler. Not all of these are NTSB reportable. And like those claims that the insurance company, those top 4 claims, many of them are not NTSB reportable, so we don't see them reflected in things like the null report and other compilations of NTSB data. But I get a lot of additional information from the FAA and individuals who contact me. And so I know of 135 reports of mishaps on among these airplanes in the previous year. Of those, or among those, the vast majority happened in visual meteorological conditions, about 77 of those. In more than half of them, the weather was not reported, and that's in large part because in more than half of them, they are not NTSB reportable events, and we might not have that information. Interestingly, about 10 of those happened at night, so there's a very little night flying actually goes on in this class of airplane, comparatively little. There's a disproportionately high number of accidents that happen at night. Among those, the most serious injury, there were 4 reports of accidents in the Beech airplanes that resulted in serious injury but no fatalities, and there were 15 instances where 1 or more person perished in the accident. So 19 serious injury or fatal accidents, costing the insurance companies a lot of money. And you'll see also that 25 of those aircraft were confirmed to have been destroyed, and another 19 had substantial damages meeting NTSB criteria, which means in many cases that airplane was totaled as well. So we're seeing a lot of issues with airplanes being totaled and destroyed in our fleet in the last year. Now, among the fatals and serious injury reports, 5 engine failures. Actually, I think that was a fairly small number. I was surprised that it wasn't more than that. Impact during or immediately after takeoff, 4. We've talked about trimmed stalls in the past and how most reported stall accidents in the traffic pattern do not happen on the approach end of the runway, but they happen on the departure end of the airport. Impact during approach, landing, or go around, including hard landings and such. These are the fatal serious injury events here. Loss of control in flight, stalls essentially, other miscellaneous items, and several that were unknowns. Where the insurance company has really made its payouts, though, are in the other events where there was not a fatal or serious injury accident. 47 of the 135 reports were some sort of landing gear mishap. Most of them gear collapses, many of them gear up landings. There were 27 reports of engine failures that resulted in an accident report that did not cause serious injury or death. I was actually kind of surprised there that we seem to have been doing a pretty good job of surviving the engine failure scenarios. Impact during approach and landing, hard landings that didn't hurt anybody, basically 10 reports. Impact immediately or shortly after takeoff, 7 reports, and then 22 other miscellaneous items, which includes things like the tow bar strikes and the taxi accidents. All right, so all of what we've talked about here are what we call underwriting criteria. Insurance underwriters are the people who look at the fleet they're trying to insure or considering insuring. They look at the losses that they've had, the amount of money that's been paid out in those, and then they try to figure out how they can manage that risk for themselves by picking and choosing what type of combination of pilot, aircraft, and operation they want to insure. So they look at all these things: pilot age, aircraft age, the complexity of the airplane, any unique features of that particular aircraft, and their own claims history with it. So that's really what's in the mindset of the insurance underwriters. I'm going to continue a little bit more about that. Before I do, a disclaimer: I am not a licensed insurance agent. I cannot legally or ethically give you specific guidance on what you should or should not do with your aircraft insurance. I was, however, for several years back in the 1990s, and you are meant to laugh at this old photograph of me. I was an insurance agent and later broker, and also an insurance underwriter for AOPA's insurance agency at the time. And so I do have some background as a licensed insurance professional that will help me explain these things to you, although, again, I am not currently a licensed insurance agent or broker. Back in those days, we had some interesting challenges as well. And I bring this up because these are the things that were going on back in the mid 1990s. And I bring them up to show you that the insurance industry is cyclic. Most of these things went away. Some of them are starting to come back. So back when I was an underwriter at AOPA Insurance Agency in about 1996 or so, I had specific guidance that told me that we could not insure any multi-engine pilots over the age of 70. Now, again, things got better. Now, things are going back to the way they were back in the 1990s. So that was a challenge then. Another issue that we had come up surprisingly often was we were not permitted to insure a student pilot with more than 100 logged flying hours. Now, what usually happened here was dad had a child and they wrote down every time the child was in the airplane their entire life, and they logged it as dual instruction. And so this 8-year-old has 60 hours. And by the time the child is old enough to actually begin as a student pilot, they are reporting 110, 120 hours of logged time on an insurance application. When the reality is that although that was valuable in-universe experience for the young person, it really wasn't what the insurance industry is thinking of as dual flight instruction. And the insurance industry was thinking, on the other hand, if somebody has more than 100 hours as a student pilot and they haven't passed their check ride yet, they may never get it. So they told us not to insure that person. Another underwriting criteria we had at the time, student pilots over age 60 were a no-no. I don't see anything like that right now, but back then we couldn't insure you if you were over 60 and just starting to learn to fly. We don't see this currently, although there's some hints that it might become an issue again. At that time, if the engine had more than 20% over its published time between overhauls, we weren't allowed to insure it at AOPA. Multi-engine airplanes built before 1964. So this was, basically 30-year-old airplanes at the time were uninsurable at that time through the agency I was working with. And any retractable gear airplanes built before 1970, 25-year-old airplanes or so, at that time, they were insurable, but the rates were significantly increased because of the age of the aircraft. Again, I say this all just because things get very tight in the insurance industry, and then eventually often one or more carrier will say, well, we're going to loosen our requirements a little bit, and they get a lot of business, and then the other underwriters decide, they're getting a lot of business, we're going to do the same thing. So I don't necessarily see anything coming in the short term to loosen the requirements in our fleet, but it may happen eventually. Now, if you owned an airplane back in the, at the turn of the century, as we say now, about 2003, if you own an airplane that was more than about 35 years old at that time, you received in the mail a copy of a little paper, yellow-covered paper book called The Best Practices Guide for Maintaining Aging General Aviation Airplanes. This guide was published by the FAA, AOPA, EAA, and a large number of Type Club and other experts, including Neil Pobance here at ABS. And what it did is it provided guidance, things to do with aircraft documentation, aircraft inspection, and ongoing aging issues to keep the aging general aviation fleet flying. One of the unintended consequences of this book, which is still available for download on the ABS website and the technical information, is that this book defined an aging general aviation aircraft as one that was more than 35 years old. If it was 35 years or older, it was aging. And many insurance companies at that time saw this as a trigger to increase rates on older airplanes or to try to get out of the market of insuring older airplanes. So even almost 20 years ago, we had issues that arose that are similar to what we're seeing today. Over the last few years, Barry Dolan at Falcon Insurance, who writes the insurance column for ABS Magazine, has been warning us to brace for premium increases and a hard market coming for older pilots. It's going to be harder to get insurance, and when you do get insurance, it's more expensive. So we've known it's been coming, and it's certainly for the last year and a half or 2 years now, it's here. Specifically, we're worried about the cost of insurance when you can get it, non-renewal of existing policies because of underwriting requirements that the company will no longer insure a certain type of airplane or a certain class of pilot, and more frequently now, both for very young pilots and pilots with little experience in make and model in older airplanes, and especially as we talk about most now, in older pilots, whether or not they can get insurance at all. Supporting some of the underwriting thinking, I think, is a document that's on the AOPA's website now. It's called Aging and the General Aviation Pilot. It's been posted for about a year or so. And it details, it talks about a lot of the research that has gone on about pilot cognition and other issues related to aging to see what if there's any correlation between pilot age and accidents, and in our case, insurance claims. A couple of things about key ideas or key points from this program, from this document. It tells us that almost all of the research into the issues of pilot age has surrounded the issue of mandatory retirement age for airline pilots. So most of the research has focused on pilots between the ages of 60 and 65, but not any older than that. There's been virtually no study of general aviation pilots, very, very little study of pilots older than age 65, and almost no study of pilots who were not professional pilots who have had decades of maintaining first-class physicals and still had them and had thousands of hours of flying experience. So some of what's in this document tells us that a lot of the research may not be directly applicable to what we're thinking about here. A couple other things here, a direct quote. A pilot's ability declines with age, but improves with accumulated flight experience. So if you are a young pilot with little experience, an older pilot with lots of experience will generally outperform you, according to these studies. If you are an old pilot with little experience, you are a very high risk. And if you are a young pilot with a lot of experience, you are probably at least as good as an older pilot with less experience. But really, a key point is that the pilot's ability declines with age, but improves with accumulated experience. A second point, a quote, older pilots are not as sharp as younger pilots who had similar amounts of experience, which I've basically already said. Given sufficient experience, the report says, older pilots performed better than their younger counterparts. Again, if the older pilot had a lot more experience than the younger pilot, then they generally performed better than that inexperienced young pilot. It gets a little more interesting, though, with this direct quote. Starting at roughly age 55, pilots began to have more accidents than would be expected given their share of the pilot population. Now, it's important to note that all of the information cited in the reports that are quoted and evaluated in this guide, all of it's based on NTSB accident reports. It does not talk about incidents or insurance claims that were not NTSB reportable events. And if you've ever been in academia, you know this phrase, at the end, it always concludes that the issue needs additional study, but it really does. Basically, this report's telling us that everything we've heard about pilot cognition and age may be correct, but it really hasn't addressed the general aviation pilot at all. One of our members, Mike McNamara, wrote an excellent article that's in the current February 2022 issue of ABS Magazine, and he looked specifically at this report and similar documents, and he concludes, I think very correctly, that the issue with insurance claims and accident histories is less one of pilot age and more an issue of pilot proficiency. So I'm going to take a couple of questions here, and then when I come back, I'm going to talk about how we can address the pilot proficiency side of this equation so that we can become and maintain ourselves as insurable. First, I want to thank VREF for being our sponsor in this program and all of the ABS web webinars for this calendar year. A couple of questions. Do Wings awards result in lower insurance premiums? Does the level make any difference? That's really two questions. The first is, do you get an insurance discount for participating in Wings? Some underwriters, Avemco, for instance, advertise quite readily that they provide a discount for pilots who participate in recognized training events, and FAA Wings is one of them. So you may be able to get a discount with some insurance carriers, maybe not with others. This and a lot of these questions are really good questions to ask your insurance agent or broker. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Does the level of Wings make any difference? I don't think so. I think the fact that you earned a level of Wings in the previous year when it comes time to renew a policy is as important as how many times in the past or to what level you have participated in the Wings program. Another question, can I buy a policy without a death coverage? No. Insurance contracts, insurance forms, as they're called, are actually designed by insurance companies, but they have to meet individual state requirements, and they can't be modified extensively to remove things like what happens if all policy coverage is voided if someone dies. That's just not something that's available out there. Next question, are these historical loss run figures inflation adjusted, or is the real value actually going up? Well, inflation's been until the last year. The inflation's been pretty flat over the last several years, and those numbers were just over the last, I think it was 5 years. So the actual numbers have actually been going up. Any data on experimental amateur built versus factory related to insurability? EAB airplanes have always had higher accident rates than type certificated factory built airplanes. On the other hand, they tend to have fewer seats and fewer passengers most of the time. And so the insurance experience is comparable. And lately, the last several years, the experimental amateur built world has had some pretty good years. I think most recent data isn't quite as good as it had been, but they've had some very, very good years in the EAB community. And so their insurance rates are up a little bit compared to type certificated airplanes. How much does insurance typically go up when one hits 70 to 75? It's going to be based on a whole lot of other factors, the type of airplane you're in. I've heard 10, 20, and 30% increases, although really we're seeing those across the board for everybody. And what we're seeing now is less, gee, we're going to charge you more because you're 75 years old in this retractable airplane, and more of, well, we're just not going to insure you anymore. So I think that's where we are right now with pilot agings. Why don't insurance companies have programs or apps to report proficiency in order to reduce premiums? Actually, Star Insurance has something very similar to what you're talking about. And Avemco doesn't have necessarily an app, but when you apply for renewal on its policy and frankly everybody's policy, it will ask you what sort of training events you've had in the previous year, and you will send in certificates to go along with that. So really it's out there, but they aren't really concerned about tracking your training in real time. They just want to see where you are at the next renewal. And that's what we're going to go to next, talking about how you can attack the insurance problem yourself. So again, so far we've talked about the problem of insurability. Now I'm going to discuss what may be a solution, or at least a strategy to follow to get the best possible outcome for your particular situation. For a few years, I was a member of the National Business Aviation Association's safety committee, specifically in the single pilot working group. And we were looking at, and the entire safety committee, of course, is always looking at ways to reduce accidents and improve safety and proficiency in airplanes, in this case, operated for business. So I was part of this group and got exposed to a lot of people in other areas of business aviation, and was able to make some contributions to the process myself. But on NBAA's safety practices website, there's an interesting quote that I really like. It says, one of the goals is that, quote, our community, NBAA members in this case, must not only be safe, it must also have the perception of safety. Now, NBAA, being an organization, has a strategic plan, and on its strategic plan, it phrases this just a little bit differently in a way that I like even better. Part of the strategic plan is to try to realize a goal where, quote, our members are not only safe, secure, and professional, but are widely perceived as such. Now, insurance is all about perceptions. When you talk about a pilot who's 72 years old flying a Model 58 Baron and exercising an instrument rating and any number of other factors, the insurance industry will develop a perception based on that. And what we want to do is to single ourselves out in a good way so that the insurance industry and the industry as a whole, and even the general public, we want them to think that ABS members are not only safe, secure, and professional, but they widely perceive us as being so. That's our goal. We want wide perception that we are good insurance risks. When an underwriter looks at a fleet of airplanes, They are insuring three things. It's called the risk. The combination of three things is called the risk: the pilot, the aircraft, and the operation. The operation being personal and business use of the aircraft. And the insurance industry tends to lump us all into this big balloon of pilots of general aviation airplanes, this particular make and model of airplane, and personal business use. And when you send an application, unless you do something to make your application look distinctive, to stand out, you're going to be perceived as being just another person in this bubble of airplanes. Our goal then is to try to break through that barrier that is the edge of this bubble of underwriting, so that underwriters don't think of us as just another Bonanza or Baron pilot, but they evaluate you, your aircraft, and your specific operation. This is a sales job. And historically, airplane owners, myself included, historically, airplane owners have looked in your logbook and updated your numbers, and you fill out the application and you send it in, and you wait for a response to come back, and you get evaluated as one of this bubble, instead of trying to proactively prepare an application that sells you as a pilot, gives the underwriters a feeling of well-being in insuring you in your airplane, flying it the way you fly it. Back in February of 2020, my Operations ASF article in ABS Magazine focused on advocacy and specifically insurance issues for older pilots. And in this article, I talked about a series of conversations I had with a senior vice president of underwriting for one of the major aviation firms a few years before that, where we talked about something that we called the ABS best practices policy. Now, at the time that we discussed this, 2016-ish or so, when insurance rates were historically very low and insurance underwriting requirements were very open to new pilots and older pilots, we really didn't think too much about that back then. The idea of the best practices policy was to provide additional support for insurance applicants who wanted to get higher levels of liability coverage or insure more expensive airplanes or insure the same airplane at a reduced rate. In other words, we talked about a way to make us stand out as individuals so that the insurance company would be confident to insure us at a higher level. By 2020, when we started to see late 2019, early 2020, when I wrote this article, we started to see some issues with pilot age and aircraft age to a lesser extent. I repitched this best practices policy idea to all of the underwriting companies that were insuring our class of airplane at that time. And my pitch this time was not to try to get a lower rate or even higher levels of liability coverage. It was specifically aimed at providing a higher level of confidence in insuring an older pilot in an ABS type airplane. It's all about selling the individual pilot, and to sell the pilot, you have to give yourself or your broker something to sell. So the best practices policy consisted of these things, all of these things. The first is some sort of annual recognized type specific training to get out of that bubble and be looked at as an individual. Take an insurance recognized training course for this type of aircraft that results in a completion certificate that the insurance underwriters are familiar with. And if you do that, you've already made yourself stand out above a great number of the population of pilots. The second part of the best practices policy is currency. try to fly at least and actually demonstrate or provide documentation that you've flown at least 4 hours as pilot in command every month of the previous year. Now, 4 hours doesn't sound like a lot. It's the military standard for getting flight pay. At least it used to be. I don't know if it's still the case now, but at least it's a recognized number that that makes the difference between being considered active as a pilot or not. Having total flight time is important, but it's at least as important, if not more important, to be current and recent in flying the airplane. And more importantly, I think, consistent. If you only fly 50 hours a year, it's much better to do it 4 hours a month, every month, than it is to fly 3 cross-country trips in the year and really not much anymore. And so the second way of selling yourself to the pilot is, or to the insurance industry, is to document that you are flying not only a certain number of hours a year, but a certain number of hours every single month. The third element of the best practices policy is continuing education, getting levels of FAA Wings, ABS Aviator. You may not get a discount for these things, but they do show the underwriters that you're going well beyond the minimum requirements to legally fly the airplane and trying to maintain and improve your knowledge and proficiency in the aircraft. The fourth element is to not only maintain yourself as a pilot, but also maintain your airplane above standards as well, minimum standards as well. And that is to take your airplane, in our case with ABS, take your airplane to an ABS service clinic every couple of years. I'd like to say every year. We simply don't have enough service clinic inspectors and slots available for everybody, but certainly we couldn't do everybody every 2 years either. But if a great many of you did this, it would help sell yourself to the insurance underwriters. Not only do you need to go to the service clinic, by the way, you also need to address the squawks that you find in the clinic. We have a number of members who yeah, not a lot, but occasionally we'll see somebody who comes to a clinic every year, every couple of years, but they never seem to fix things. Part of the implied contract of a service clinic is that you'll actually repair the things that you find on it between then and the next clinic. Now, this next one is a little bit controversial. It goes counter to some of the economic argument out there now about flying the airplanes. But again, we're talking about making ourselves sellable to the insurance industry. Overhaul your engine at or not very much beyond TBO. And in our airplanes, overhaul and maintain the landing gear per the Beechcraft recommended procedures, which we recommend you do anyhow at ABS, because it doesn't cost a great deal to maintain the landing gear, but it costs a whole lot if something breaks on it. It probably will total the airplane. So if you want to sell yourself to the insurance company, say, all right, not only am I maintaining myself as a pilot, I'm also maintaining the airplane well above the standard, the minimum standards set by the FAA. Look at me differently from everybody else in that underwriting bubble that you're evaluating. This one's also a little bit controversial. Remember that until about 3 or 4 years ago, one of the most common ways that underwriters would manage the risk of insuring an airplane with an older pilot was to say, okay, well, you're on a third-class medical, but we want you to take a third-class medical every year. They were increasing the medical requirements. When Basic Med came out about 5 years ago, and when it really started to make traction in the industry a couple of years after that, we didn't see as many of the insurance underwriters mandating an annual physical for privately operated airplanes with older pilots. But if you can, and you can be on Basic Med if you want. They seem to accept Basic Med just as well as they accept a third-class physical. But if you say, all right, I'm a Basic Med, but I'm doing the Basic Med medical examination not every 5 years, but I'm doing it every 2 years or every 1 year. Or if I want to be on an FAA medical, I'm doing it every year, not every 2 years, which is the minimum requirement. Make them more confident in you as a healthy and active pilot by showing them that you're not trying to do just the minimum medical requirements to get by. All right, again, some of these are controversial. Remember, all of these are voluntary, but at the same time, it's voluntary whether or not that insurance company is going to offer you a policy as well. So the objective here is to be safe, but also to be perceived as safe, especially by the insurance companies. Put another way, there is a ceiling, if you will, on the insurance underwriter's expectations of a pilot, the aircraft, and the operation. We want you to break through that ceiling by providing some documentation that shows you are going far beyond the minimums, and they should feel more confident in insuring you. All right, training requirements. Many insurance companies add training requirements to their policies, especially if you're new to the airplane type or transitioning into it. Sometimes when you maintain a higher level of liability coverage or a higher aircraft hull value, they may tack on a training requirement for you annually. Usually what happens is they will say, all right, we're going to write this policy for you, and sometime in the next 12 months, you need to do this training requirement. They'll add an endorsement that requires that. So it's something that will be done in the future. The key is you have to get the policy in the first place for this to be the case. Often these requirements are rather vague and sometimes arbitrary. They'll say you've got to get 5 hours of dual, but they won't tell you what the 5 hours has to cover. Overall, we need to do something because they are concerned about us as a new pilot to this type of airplane or as an older pilot in this type of airplane. So I think it's much better, instead of waiting for them to assign you some requirements, do these things before you file that renewal policy and include documentation of all of it to your insurance broker or agent before the process of renewing your policy begins. Again, it's a sales job. It's you, your aircraft, and your operation. But how do you make that sale? Who do you make the sale to? There are 4 different types of individual involved in the aircraft insurance process: the aircraft owner, an agent, a broker, and an underwriter. Now, each one has its own different responsibilities and what it can and cannot do. The aircraft owner, of course, is probably you. You have an insurable interest. You own that airplane. If it's damaged in some way, you have experienced real loss, and so you can be covered by insurance. You have insurable interest. You submit your application. You accept whatever coverage is offered. You sign a legal contract with the underwriter, and you are legally obligated to comply with whatever policy requirements exist. If you don't, then the insurance is void. And if you have a claim and have not complied, then they have every right not to pay it. The next type of individual is an insurance agent. And we use the term agent a lot. We actually use it incorrectly most of the time. An agent is a person who represents one or more underwriters, usually one underwriter. If I were an insurance agent, I would work for a particular underwriter. If I walk into the State Farm agency in the local strip mall to try to insure my house, they're not going to offer me American Family Insurance. They're just going to offer me State Farm. Well, an agent is someone who works just for one company. They may do one or two, but generally one company. They are representing the company's interests. And that can be very good, but at the same time, remember who they are. They will accept your application, they'll forward it to their own in-house underwriters, and they will act as a go-between between you and the underwriter. But the agent does not set any requirements, nor does it set any prices or rates. The underwriters do those things. The agent does not say yes or no, we'll cover you. The agent does not say, oh, we'll cover you and it's going to cost you X number of dollars. Somebody else makes that decision. The person most of us deal with most of the time is really not, we call them an agent, they're really a broker. And a broker is someone who represents you, the airplane owner, and takes your application. They're independent of any other of the underwriters. They take your application and they shop it around to the available market. They'll go to every one of the underwriters they feel might potentially offer insurance on your airplane, on your airplane, and your operation. The broker will act as the go-between between you and the underwriters, and like an agent, the broker has no say in who will or will not be covered, and if they are covered, what training requirements might exist, or any other requirements, and or what it will cost. But they're going to be a go-between between you and the people who make these choices, who are the underwriters. The underwriters are the folks that actually work at the companies that will pay money if you have a claim. They will accept applications from their agents and from brokers. They will set the underwriting guidelines, who they will and will not insure and at what cost. They do not directly speak to airplane owners. You really can't get on the phone and talk to the person who makes the decision about this. You have to relay everything through your agent or broker. And of course, the underwriter pays any claims that you might have. If you've ever had an aircraft insurance claim, you probably called your broker or agent to report it, and the first thing they did was give you a contact number or had somebody from the underwriting firm contact you, and the agent and broker is out of the picture for the most part at that point. So these are the different people. So part of you making your sales pitch is to know who you are talking to. Ask them some questions. Are you an agent or a broker? It's a perfectly legitimate question because it tells you a little bit about whether or not they are shopping you around to the larger industry. Ask them something like, which underwriters will you contact with my application? Now, historically, we let them do their thing, and usually the underwriters will, or the brokers will pick what they feel is the best deal for us, and they'll say, hey, your insurance premium is this, and we can renew you, and off you go. And the conversation doesn't get much deeper than that. But in a world of rising insurance premiums and a world of difficulty getting insurance at all in some cases, it really is nice to know that your broker is not just going back to the company you've been with for a while, but is working to see what possibilities exist for you in the wider industry. Second thing to think about, have this conversation early. The insurance renewal process begins usually 90 to 120 days before the renewal date. And that's when you want to submit your documentation to the underwriters. Ask your agent or to the broker. Ask your agent or broker if there have been any underwriting changes in the last year that you need to be concerned about, so that you can give them more documentation before they make the sales pitch for you. And ask them straight up, what is your strategy regarding these changes? How are we going to deal with this? So I'm arguing for a higher level of interaction with the insurance agents and brokers than we historically have had, because we have to work together to make this thing happen. All right, submit your documentation earlier. Get your paperwork together and send it to your agent or broker at that 90 to 120 days out point. It's far better to have the entire package ready to deliver with the request for quotes than to have declines happen, the insurance industry to say no, and then you have to try to convince them otherwise. Again, it's all about perception. We need to manage that perception. Then stay on top of the process. It's perfectly legitimate to call your agent or broker. We hear that all the time. You know, we see it in magazine articles all the time. If you have any questions, give us a call. Well, take them up on it. Be involved in the process so that you can provide additional documentation if it's needed. Give them more information if they need it to sell you to those underwriters. All right. And again, ask them, if we get a decline, we've done all this stuff and we get a decline, what's your strategy for dealing with that? Then keep training and maintaining yourself, even after you've submitted this documentation, because Now you're preparing yourself for the next year's renewal. Not only are you being a safer pilot and being more responsible to your passengers and family, but you're also preparing yourself up for setting yourself up for success the following year when you're going to be 1 year older in this insurance environment. So how do you cover the available market? Really, in our current world, it takes 2 phone calls. Call an agent. The only direct writing agency in aviation insurance right now in this market is a VEMCO. A VEMCO doesn't work through brokers. If you call anybody else, they're probably not going to talk to a VEMCO. So give them a call or check their website and see what they offer. And then contact a broker. A broker is supposed to take your application, your information, and go to every one of the available underwriters and get what hopefully is the best options available for you. So it really takes 2 phone calls to be able to cover the entire available insurance market. Now, to whom do you make the sale, or who makes the sales pitch? If you're talking to a broker, the broker is making this pitch to the underwriters on your behalf. So you have to give them ammunition to be able to hold you up as being better than that general bubble of underwriting. If you're talking to an agent, you yourself are making the sales pitch to that person because they are really a representative of the insurance underwriters themselves. Let's say you do get an offer of insurance and the prices are kind of high and you're looking at ways to keep the costs down. There are several different ways that you might reduce the total cost of insurance. And again, here's my disclaimer. I'm not an insurance agent. I'm not giving you advice, but it's something you might talk to your agent or broker about. The first is to use liability only insurance. All aircraft insurance policies consist of liability. If you get sued, this is money that protects you, defends you. And if there's a successful judgment against you, somebody else was injured or has lost because of your operation of the airplane, if they sue you in court successfully or your underwriters settle out of court, this money pays them. But if your airplane is damaged, that's all on you. There's no coverage for it. So that's one option. And this will significantly reduce your total insurance costs. But again, there's no coverage for damage or theft or fires or anything like that if you have a liability only policy. Another is ground only physical damage coverage. You have the liability policy and you only have coverage for damage or to the aircraft while it is on the ground. It will usually cut the airplane portion of the insurance premium by less than 50% usually, but it will cut it down some. Basically, you'll be covered up to the point where you take the active runway for takeoff, and coverage will resume when you exit the runway after a fully controlled landing at the end of your flight. So that will keep your prices down a little bit. An issue a lot of people get involved with is underinsuring. Well, I'm just not going to insure the airplane for what it's really worth. And the problem there is it will take less damage for the airplane to be totaled, and they'll take it all away from you, including all those avionics you put in and everything, and you only get a check for what you insured the airplane for. So there's definite hazard there. And then lastly, self-insuring, which means carry no insurance at all. A lot of people talk about liability only as self-insuring, but it's not. When you're talking about self-insuring, you're really saying, I just don't have any liability. I don't have any insurance coverage at all on this airplane. The biggest issue with that is that almost all hangar leases and even tie-down agreements require that you have at least liability coverage. So it may severely limit where you can store the airplane if you self-insure it. All right, so we're going to make your best sales pitch. And let's say you do everything you possibly can, you satisfy all of those best practices requirements, and regardless of all of your efforts and all of the expert work that your broker put into this, the answer is no. You're not going to be able to get insurance on this airplane. This is happening with some frequency now, unfortunately. Ask some questions when you get this contact that the answer is no. What specific reason was given for my non-renewal or the decline? Maybe you can address that. Maybe there's an appeals process. Did you, the broker, appeal this already on my behalf? How did you do it, and what was their response? If they haven't, will you appeal this for me? And how will you do it? And if they've done it, what additional if they're still need to appeal, what additional information do they need from you to try to make that sale? Ask, what other underwriters have you sent my application? What you're really saying here is, did you check every possibility for me? And if you haven't, let's do it before we say I can't get any insurance. And then ask all of these same questions about the other underwriters. You may find that it might cost a little more. You might have an unusual insurance relationship. It might end up going to the Lloyd's of London market or something, but you might still be able to get coverage in some way. Lastly, ask your agent or broker, what is your advice? What can I do? If you're not satisfied, you might talk to somebody else. Insurance underwriters will provide a quote of insurance on an individual risk, pilot, airplane, operation combination, to the first broker that submits your application. They will not provide this to any additional brokers later on. If you're not satisfied with the way your broker has handled this, you can do something called an agent of record or a broker of record letter, which is a legal way of saying, I am severing my relationship with this broker, and now I'm going to use this other broker. It's a bit of a drastic move, and the reality is underwriters will give the new broker exactly the same policy conditions and premium rates that you would have gotten quoted through the first one. So this is kind of a last ditch effort if you don't feel that your broker has shopped every available possibility and you want somebody else to look at these other options for you. But it is there. Talk to your agent or broker about an agent of broker or a broker of record letter if you get to the point where things are broken down and you need to do that. All right. Some options. We're hearing these sort of policy requirements for some older pilots a lot later. One of them is they're saying, well, we'll cover you, but you always have to have a younger pilot in the aircraft with you who's qualified as pilot in command. Gets logistically difficult to do that, but if you elect to do that, think about it in positive terms. You have to have a second qualified pilot on board. That pilot has to meet your open pilot warranty. So let's think positive. This is your opportunity to pass along what you've learned about flying and what you've learned about this airplane and groom the potential next owner of this aircraft. So, turning lemons into lemonade, but what we're going to do here is try to look at this positively if this is the only option available to you. You might make a good traveling friend here, flying around with somebody that you wouldn't have flown around a lot with also, otherwise. Another commonality is that extra person has to come with you and that person has to be a flight instructor. So look at this as your opportunity to teach a teacher. You have to have a second qualified pilot who is a CFI meeting the open pilot warranty. So look at this as an opportunity, again, to pass along what you've learned and also to further a young professional's career. Get a young instructor and they will leapfrog decades of what they would have learned on their own by learning from what you've learned flying light airplanes. Another option we hear a lot is the insurance agencies are saying, or the underwriters are saying, we'll insure you if you downgrade a little bit. You might have to move from a twin to a single. You might have to move from a retract to a fixed gear airplane. Doesn't sound so good from an ABS standpoint, but there may be opportunities for you to continue to fly, even if they won't cover you in what is your current first airplane of choice. And then think about this as an opportunity to inspire the next generation. We have a very finite fleet of Beech airplanes, and frankly, it's shrinking all of the time because attrition of our airplanes is far exceeding production of new Bonanzas and Barons. So if we have a finite universe of these airplanes, the only way to create that next generation of Beech owners is for the current generation of beach owners to sell them their airplane. So if all else fails and you're not going to be able to get insured in your airplane and you decide that going without insurance is not for you, it's unfortunate, but at least do what you can to make it a positive experience for you and for that next generation of owners. But until that time happens, be aggressive with your aircraft insurance. Break out of that bubble so that the underwriters are looking at you as an individual, your aircraft as something outside of the bubble, and your operation as not only safe, but being perceived as safe. The insurance universe today is very challenging, especially for pilots with little time in make and model, and even more especially for older pilots. And there are times when you will not, unfortunately, you will not be able to get insurance under your current circumstances. What I hope you'll do is take what I've presented in this webinar as background information on why the situation is as it is, so that you can develop your own strategy that is going to get you looked at as an individual and not just another pilot flying just another airplane. All right, I'm going to look at some more questions here, and then we'll wrap it up. Let me get back to my questions. All right, how much does flying a simulator help? I'm trying to fly it once a week in IMC, and pilot says he's 65 years old. Actually, especially if the training device that you're using qualifies as loggable information, you know, it's something that meets the requirements that you can use toward currency in the airplane, I would absolutely record all of that information and include it in your renewal application. You may, if you can't log it, it's absolutely not going to hurt at all to include a list of all that you've done there anyhow. I received a phone call from one of our members several weeks back along these lines, and he said, you know, I don't fly at night anymore. Should I include this on my application for insurance because I am getting a little older? Should I just tell them, you know, I'm a better risk because I don't fly at night? And I said, well, that might help, but then it might also raise some flags to them. So I would put it just a little differently. Instead of saying I don't fly at night, I would send them a short list of risk management strategies that you use and include that as one of them. I no longer fly at night. I no longer do this. He told me later on, I don't fly when there's less than 1,000-foot ceiling, and send a short letter with your application that says, this is my personal operations policy here that makes me better than maybe the average risk. So you might include simulator flying on that as well. It certainly cannot hurt. How much does an instrument rating bear on insurability? In this class of airplane, quite a bit. You may never use your insurance rating or your instrument rating, but the insurance industry looks at that as having attained a higher level of proficiency in the aircraft and precision. And so it will absolutely not hurt. There have been times in history where you really couldn't get, back when I was selling at AOPA Insurance, it was very difficult to get someone an insurance policy on a new Bonanza at that time if they were not instrument rated, and virtually impossible in twin. So absolutely it can't hurt, and it will probably help. Any thoughts on liability only coverage and then self-insured whole? I think I addressed that. You're taking a risk, but if you're willing to take that risk, great. Not only will the liability insurance keep your costs down, it will also satisfy any hangar lease requirements and cover you if something really bad happens. You accept the fact that if the airplane's damaged in a storm or you have an incident of some sort, that you're just going to cover that risk. What impact on my insurability would having getting my CFI becoming a flight instructor? Interestingly enough, and I think it's still the case, when I was selling insurance, getting your instrument rating back in those days helped quite a bit. Anything beyond that, not so much. Although we as pilots think about each new certificate and rating that we get as making us sharper and improving our skills, and they do, the insurance industry doesn't seem to really recognize much of that. There are actually, again, back when I was an insurance guy, there were actually situations where somebody would get an ATP and they would increase the liability premium on their policy. The thinking being that, yeah, so if they do something stupid, you can convince a jury maybe that a private pilot, yeah, well, they can get away with it, but it would be harder to convince a jury that an airline transport pilot should not have known better and worked better. So basically, the thinking was that it was all a wash. You were better for having earned it, but it also might increase your liability a little bit. So they didn't provide any discounts. Are there any statistics regarding accident frequency in the course of training versus non-instructional flying? Actually, yes. Flight instruction is one of the safest possible things done in general aviation airplanes. It's generally because almost always it's an extremely controlled environment. We don't do flight instruction in bad weather. We don't do flight instruction. We tend to stop doing flight instruction when the winds get too strong. If the student pilot has not yet earned his or her private certificate or recreational or sport or whatever you're working on, then every single flight has to be approved and overseen by a flight instructor. So we actually manage the risk quite well in flight instruction. There are accidents in instruction. If you look in our online learning center in the BPPP instructor renewal course, which anyone can take, it's free on our website, any member can take. One of the modules in there talks about instructional accidents and how to avoid them, because they do happen, but they happen with a lot less frequency than non-instructional flying. Are there any specific airplanes that insurance companies view as less risky than others, such as the 172? If you are an airline pilot flying a Cessna 172 day VFR only, you are absolutely the dream prospect of the insurance industry. They like simple, they like slow, they like very common airplanes. The converse of that, you know, people like, hey, I want to get, this is the only one of these, and this is a real rare airplane. The insurance companies don't look on that very favorably. Cessna 182s are extreme, fixed gear 182s are also extremely popular in the insurance world. And a few of the ABS members I know have very reluctantly sold their beach airplane and gotten a fixed gear 182 because it was an insurable aircraft for them. How does insurance look at flying clubs? Is there an impact on insurance cost if some club members stay out of currency or have inactive medical for a period of time? I haven't spent much time myself in the commercial world, and a flying club is a commercial risk. They are much more expensive to insure. Basically, the coverage will be predicated on a pilot being current to operate the airplane, and a pilot who is not current is not operating the airplane, so it shouldn't have any real impact on the rates. If anything, it's better for the insurance company because not as many people are flying the aircraft. But flying clubs themselves are seen as rated as a commercial operation and much more expensive. At that point, it would only be covering pilots that were current to fly the airplane anyhow. I know an older pilot who could not get a Bonanza insured. He's based in California, but he could if he was based in Nevada. This is an interesting point. And this was true even back in the 90s when I was selling insurance. Aircraft insurance in California typically costs more, and that's because historically there are many more aircraft thefts and break-ins in California than any other state. And so many insurance companies will charge extra if the airplane's based in California. Interesting you mentioned this here also. I know, for example, we had a member call in recently who has a TBM, a turboprop that he's flying. He was buying a V35B, and his insurance company said, we'll continue to insure you in the turboprop, but we won't insure you in the V35B. And the reasoning for that was the aircraft itself. That particular company no longer insures Bonanzas, and but it did still insure that. So there are a lot of peculiarities like this, and geographic regions are one of them that we don't hear about a whole lot, but they do exist. As a soon-to-retire airline pilot interested in re-entering the general aviation community, am I better off regarding insurance by doing so before retirement? Anytime you're looking at buying an aircraft or co-owning an airplane, solve the insurance issue first. The worst thing that could happen would be for you to buy an airplane and then find out that there's no way to get insurance on it. So regardless of your circumstances, if you are looking at purchasing an airplane or purchasing part of an airplane, call an agent or broker right now. If you haven't settled on a specific airplane, they will be able to give you, they won't give you a quote, but they'll give you something called an indication. They'll say, okay, I'm looking at a mid-1960s Bonanza. This is my experience. What might you be looking at? And they'll give you a very rough idea of what insurance would cost and whether or not it's available. But look at the insurance question before you ever even start thinking about pre-purchase inspections and anything like that. Does having your airplane registered in an LLC have any insurance effect? No, it really doesn't seem to, and that's because AOPA has written about this a lot. You might have a limited amount of protection having the airplane in an LLC, but you are still the pilot, and if something happens because of what could be proven or to be your negligence, then that will pierce that corporate veil anyhow. And so it really doesn't have any impact whether or not it's in an LLC. What is the best and the minimum required policy for a student pilot who flies only the school airplanes? You can get non-owned aircraft insurance, and I highly recommend it. It's actually very inexpensive, or at least comparatively inexpensive. Talk to any one of the brokers. Falcon Insurance, which manages the ABS program, works a program. NAFI, the National Association of Flight Instructors, and SAFE, the Society of Aviation and Flight Educators, the two flight instructor professional societies also have programs through them, and Avemco also has a non-owned aircraft policy. This will protect you. The insurance on those airplanes at the school will protect the school if something goes wrong, but if you're found to be negligent in some way, it may or may not protect you. So for just a little extra investment, what it would cost to fly the airplane for a couple of hours, you can usually get a level of insurance, at least as a student, $500,000 liability and maybe $5,000 of aircraft whole value that would at least cover a deductible if one's judged against you would certainly help out. So talk to them about that. One last point. One last question just popped up. Would landing and takeoff recency make a difference? Historically, no, but as part of the larger package, if you demonstrate to the underwriters during your application process that you go out of your way to maintain a high level of currency, if they were on the edge, if they're sitting on the fence, whether or not they would insure you, it might be the sort of thing that would work in your favor. So every little thing you can do helps. And of course, we want to be safe pilots as well. That's what we really are aiming for, is to enjoy our aviation experience and not have any accidents, not have any injuries. Everything you can do to be proficient is going to help with that. And as we all age, myself included, we need to focus even more on proficiency. As Mike McNamara wrote, it's not necessarily a matter of age, it's a matter of how proficient we are in the airplanes. Hopeful note here, in about 45 minutes before this program began, one of the members in California actually gave me a phone call. He wasn't going to be able to watch tonight. He asked if the program was going to be recorded, which it is. It'll be on our website. And what he asked me, or what he told me, was he's 77 years old. He's flying a twin engine airplane, a Baron, and he was successful in getting his insurance renewed this year because, along with his insurance packet, he included documentation that he had flown 15 hours of dual flight instruction received with a pilot in a program that the insurance underwriter is familiar with. And so whereas otherwise he would have been probably an automatic decline just because of that general bubble of underwriting that I talked about, He made himself stand out as a proficient pilot who is working to maintain that proficiency, and he was allowed to. He was offered and accepted a renewal on his insurance. All right. A lot of material here tonight. Feel free to send in more questions if you have them to me at info@bonanza.org. More importantly, address your question to your insurance agent or broker. They're the ones that can give you real up-to-date information. They're the ones that can work with you on a strategy to maintain your insurability.